Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell and I'm so happy you're here with me today because I have a guest who it turns out that she and I have a ton in common relative to our mutual love of audio to make your storytelling and particularly your customer testimonials more compelling to your prospects. We both built our production chops producing radio, in my case radio commercials, and we embrace the theater of the mind in our listeners to get them to tune in and turn on. Traci DeForge is the founder of Produce Your Podcast. She's an award-winning radio producer and is exceptional at creating customer testimonials for her show and the podcast she produces for her clients. She's going to show you how to make all of your client and customer stories ring the cash register. An audio metaphor that still works in our PayPal world. In my early days in the advertising biz, nearly 40 years ago, I wrote and produced hundreds of radio spots. Not having any real training in creating 60-second radio commercials, I was totally winging it and always intuitively defaulted to telling wacky stories about our clients. In fact, I celebrated my 300th episode of The Business of Story, sharing the 10 storytelling tips that ignite sales that I learned during those years of producing radio commercials. If you want to hear it and the commercials I produced, the link is in the show notes. I was and still am a big believer in being entertaining to educate and sell. Edutainment, as Traci calls it. Part of being entertaining, I learned, is that you sometimes have to use a little guerrilla marketing, especially if you have a competitor kicking your butt with customer testimonials. We had a client in Phoenix called Robinette Roofing, owned by a guy named Warren Hess. They were a scrappy roofing contractor that was quickly rising up the Arizona roofing industry food chain because Warren had the guts to sign off on some pretty crazy radio spots. Robinette's chief competitor was Universal Roofing, the #1 roofing brand in the market at the time. Their advertising was pretty much based on one man. That guy was Pat McMahon. Pat McMahon, to this day, is a broadcast icon in Arizona. Years back, he played several characters in the Wallace and Ladmo TV show, the longest-running kids series in the history of TV. At the time of the spot I'm about to play for you, McMahon had the #1 radio show on KTAR, their morning drive time program. He had a very folksy delivery and cutting wit that was hard to beat. His promotional reads exuded trust in the advertisers he promoted. He was like the Pope of popular radio, and his sponsors knew it. Universal Roofing leveraged his live on-air character to build trust for their brand, and they were killing it. So I cooked up the idea of creating a fictional radio personality to thwart Pat McMahon. His name was Les McMore, and I produced a spot of McMore getting all of his different sponsorship reads mixed up on air. And here's the best part. We only ran the commercial on Pat McMahon's morning show. Give it a listen, and then I'll explain what happened next.
Hello, this is Les McMore. You know what my lovely wife Vivian, who by the way looks smashing in evening wear from Lady Carol's on Camelback, and I did this weekend? Well, we went to Mary Bert's famous steakhouse for a big, juicy roof. Now hold it. This is supposed to be a testimonial for Intergalactic Roofing. I'm getting a free roof out of the deal. Here it is. Vivian and I fixed our roof with XYZ security because... Intergalactic Roofing, right, applies only the finest USDA prime beef to your roof, protecting you from burglars,
Paid endorsements are a dime a dozen. However, if you want guaranteed protection with any type of roof, call Robinette Roofing at 252-7474. And for real testimonials, talk to homeowners who truly rely on the complete protection of a Robinette roof. Then call Robinette for your free inspection and estimate, 252-7474.
So for the roofer Vivian and I think of first, call XYZ's famous Lady Carol, member FDIC.
I just love that. Member FDIC. I love that end. And it was our talent, Jim Kirby, that came up with that just impromptu right at the end of the recording, and we left it in. So here's what I really love. The first morning of running the spot, Sandy Peterson, my boss, got a call from KTAR's station manager demanding that we pull the spot off the air. Sandy, much to his credit, said, "Jim, do you really want us to pull that spot? I mean, what if the Arizona Republic newspaper got wind that you were censoring our advertising on your highest rated talk show because Pat McMahon was offended?" Jim relented. Warren was tickled, and Robinette gained sales ground on Universal Roofing. I ran into Pat McMahon 20 years or so after that spot aired and asked him if he remembered Les McMore promoting intergalactic roofing on his show. He said, "Yes, I do. Was that you?" He put the two and two together. I asked him if it made him mad, and he said, "No, actually, I thought the strategy and the spot were funny as hell." Ah, the Irish. Well, that's the power of audio, lighting up the theater of the mind to hook your listeners and make them part of your story. So if you host your own podcast, produce audio, video, or any kind of content, and you really want to beckon your audience into and become part of your story, today you'll learn about the edutainment power of audio storytelling.
Your content is pulling people in. It is the one area where they're choosing to spend the time with you. It's an on-demand platform for the most part. So when they make a conscious decision to invest their time with you, you need to really show up and provide them an entertaining, educating, informative, inspirational conversation. Try to hit all of those points wherever possible, but really focusing on that edutainment piece so that people are seeing it as a value return on exchange for their time.
Traci has over 3 decades of experience in broadcast media, executive management, and Fortune 500 business consulting. She is the founder of Produce Your Podcast, a premier podcast consulting and production agency that incorporates podcasting into the digital marketing strategy of B2B and B2C companies. With a diverse career spanning startups to Fortune 500 giants like Google and Hilton, she's renowned for business development insights that drive innovation. As CEO of Ladies Who Launch, Traci pioneered the franchise media model, supporting women-owned businesses. An international podcast expert and speaker, she created the Podcast Management Academy, the industry's only podcast management certification program, and she co-founded the Podcast Professionals Association. Traci hosts the Growth Accelerator podcast, Journey to There, and co-hosts the popular Ask Brian radio show in Los Angeles. Recognized by ABC, NBC, CNN, CTV, and American Express Open, Traci is a proud member of the Rolling Stone Culture Council, where she leads the podcast member program. So today, we'll show you how to integrate storytelling into your testimonials, marketing around your products and services, and calls to action. Because as Traci says, your podcast is your platform. Share your stories for impact and conversions. Please welcome to the Business of Story, Traci DeForge. Traci, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Park. I'm happy to be here.
And you are coming to us from San Carlos, Mexico, I just learned?
Yes, I am. Isn't that fabulous?
And do you live there full time or just visiting and being on the show, or what's going on?
Well, I'm living the digital nomad life right now. Our Produce Your Podcast, my company, is based out of Florida, and we have a team all across North America and in Mexico. So you'll find me in Los Angeles, New York, Mexico. I just really like to stay busy.
And what is this platform, Produce Your Podcast? Tell us a little bit about that.
Produce Your Podcast is a full-service podcast marketing production agency. We work with business owners who are leveraging their podcasts to grow their businesses, really focusing on visibility, leads, and sales for their business. And we are 360-degree full service from start to finish, soup to nuts, and we help you monetize the show, grow the show, and really put out a great quality show.
And you come from a very successful media background, don't you? Could you give us a little bit of your backstory that has led you to creating Produce Your Podcast?
I would be happy to. So my literal first love is audio storytelling, and just the power of the audio medium. And I fell in love with radio at a really young age. I often share the story that my dad was the president of the March of Dimes when I was growing up, and they always had the live remotes at the walkathons. And I was a big fan of calling in and making requests on the radio and making my own playlist before playlists were a thing. And I just really fell in love with the medium of radio. And then I was fortunate enough when I graduated from college to actually go and work in radio for a broadcast company that was on a very accelerated growth trajectory. So I really thrived in that environment. I ended up at the top of my career before I went to start my own business. I was managing 12 stations in the Atlanta metro, all formats, sports, news talk, rock, pop, country. We produced the University of Georgia Sports Network. So it just was, first of all, it was just an amazing personal experience and absolute phenomenal professional experience for me. And it was the catalyst for me to then go out on my own, where I did a lot of management transition coaching and sales training and development for other radio stations initially, and then worked with women entrepreneurs to help grow their businesses, a lot of startups, and did Fortune 500 consulting for brands that you might be familiar with, like Weight Watchers International, Google, Microsoft, like a lot of the marquee brands. But that's actually what led me to want to start my own podcast. And this was back in 2015 when I was doing a project with Weight Watchers International to help reinvigorate their in-person meeting model. I worked with the global innovation team there, and we were piloting this amazing beta event. And it was an inspiration for me to start my first podcast, which is Journey to There. And it's all about exploring the intersection between personal and business growth. And I wanted to start a podcast, and there were no full service agencies out there like we have today. So I pulled a team together from my radio background, launched my first show, and then very quickly realized that a lot of other business owners like me, coaches, consultants, authors, like that they would want to have their own podcast, and that there would be a need for people to help service them. And the rest is history. Produce Your Podcast was born.
Well, you and I then share the love of audio. I mean, I grew up in my early career as a writer in advertising, writing and producing radio commercials. And it was my all-time favorite thing to do because you could use storytelling and music and sound effects to really build that theater of the mind in your listener, and they become a true participant in your storytelling, unlike
like no
TV,
other.
not quite so much. What was it about audio that got you interested in radio and podcasting?
Well, I mean, honestly, I would say the same that you said. I mean, I was always fascinated with advertising. Again, very young age. It was just something that I was really always drawn to, even if it was the circular in the Sunday paper. Like, I just really always loved marketing and branding and all of the things around that. But for me, I loved radio. I loved listening to radio. I loved the air talents and their creativity. I loved the creativity of radio commercials. And I love the theater of the mind. I mean, when I was very, very small, I used to sleep with an AM transistor radio under my pillow listening to ghost stories. So clearly it's like in my DNA. And I often share the same experience that you shared about theater of the mind, because right now, even in conversations, people are, well, do I have to have a video podcast? Can I just have an audio podcast? And I like to share the story. Well, if you wanted to produce a white elephant swimming in a chocolate river and then a peanut butter bank that it wanted to sit on, you could not. You could produce that in video or film.
Might be kind of expensive.
It would be very expensive, and you first would have to find the white elephant. That's the key. But I think it's such a powerful way to communicate who you are and what you're about, and your voice is a vulnerable component of who you are, and that authenticity it just can't be replicated, even with all of the vigor around artificial intelligence and all of those things. It's like you still get to be you and who you are in your voice and share your story and your perspective.
Yeah. And one thing you hear on radio, and I don't listen to much radio anymore, of course, because we've got Spotify and everything else. But it used to be when we were on radio, you would hear the paid endorsements, the local drive time host who is trying to read a testimonial about a particular company or product or service or whatever. And sometimes they worked and other times they blew up because they were obvious what they were was just another ad. So one thing I want to explore with you then is how do you bring storytelling to testimonials, whether you have a podcast, you're running radio commercials, or you're just trying to use them on your website and your social media in outreach efforts. How do you really make those testimonials sing using storytelling?
Well, I think that you apply the same context of entertaining and educating and engaging in the same way that you would in your regular podcast content or your other content that you're creating. You carry that over into really inspiring people to engage with your testimonials. So there are a couple of different ways that you can approach that. One is in a similar format of what we're doing right now is you're having a conversation with me, you're learning more about me and my business. The best way for me to do that and share that with you is to share a story like, how did a divorce mediator become a TEDx speaker? Well, a divorce mediator became a TEDx speaker because she started a podcast called The Amicable Divorce Expert, where she was really helping coach people and help them get through heart healthy divorces. And as a result of that, people just really caught on to a heart healthy message. And she was able to expand that into being on stages and doing corporate HR events. And that led to her being on a TEDx stage, which was a bucket list item for her. So if you see what I just did there, I literally just shared a testimonial with you about one of our clients at Producer Podcast who has had phenomenal success, but ideally it was entertaining for you as opposed to me just saying, hey, let me tell you what we did for one of my clients.
And why do people have such a hard time creating testimonials that way versus, hey, let me show you what we've been doing for all of our clients and how wonderful we are?
Well, I think, first and foremost, I'm going to come back to what I was saying about our voice is our most vulnerable space. So if you think about that's the place where you speak your truth, that's the place where you might be sharing something to have a courageous conversation that might be that's the literal bottleneck to either get something out or keep something in. When people are sharing testimonials, a lot of times it's a humility factor. People feel humble. They might feel uncomfortable talking about their success. They may feel like that they're being braggadocious. But what they're underestimating is the power of a story makes you relatable and helps you connect to other potential clients and other audiences and just it up levels the likability factor, the know, like, and trust you factor. But you can't really do that in a way that you're just talking at someone all of the time. You want to have it be a two-way conversation. You want to have it be something that people it's hard to be on the edge of your seat with a testimonial so much. But what it can do is your story about how you helped and supported someone with your products and services or anything that you're really wanting to convey as a success story. If that's relatable and you're likable in the way you're sharing it, then it's going to resonate with someone who might like you and then might like to work with you versus having no one just likes to be talked at. And I think there's a lot of noise. And so the more you can break through the noise by not talking at someone, but by telling them a story, they are just more likely to want to continue to hear you share more stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and old-fashioned marketing is definitely a push strategy. Let me push all this stuff on you in hopes that it'll trigger you to buy something, where storytelling is a pull strategy. You tell a story to suck them in to the story, to pull them into your world instead of pushing it on them. So, Traci, give us an example of how you might sell a vitamin on your show.
Oh, okay. So if you need, if you're a person who just has an incredibly slumpy afternoon and you're always feeling like, oh my gosh, I would walk over hot coals right now for a coffee, but I'm trying to give up coffee and I'm not sure that's really even my best solution because I'm just going to have a crash. I personally would just think that a vitamin might be a better alternative, but I wasn't sure about it because I thought, coffee, vitamin, I think I'd always rather choose coffee, but I'm trying to be a lot more healthy. So I found liquid gold, which is actually a liquid vitamin because I don't really like to, speaking of getting things stuck in your throat, I don't really like the idea of swallowing vitamins so much. But I looked into this vitamin liquid gold, and it really has been liquid gold for me. It has some great B12 in it and all the things, even some greens. And so I just drink a shot of that in the afternoon instead of the coffee for now. And I'm seeing amazing results.
So you're sharing your own personal experience. You are then that online celebrity that is endorsing this product through your own trial of it.
Yes.
And then sharing that story with your audience.
And using the walking over hot coals for a hot coffee. And just, again, that whole theater of the mind component, really integrating that into so that as you're hearing my story, you're not thinking, why is she talking about vitamins? You're picturing me dancing across hot coals for a coffee.
And when you're doing this, are you thinking, and we're going to remain on the audio track here because that's what we're doing here. We're not, I record all my shows in video, but I never release them in video, and people think I'm nuts. And I should probably really do that, but I just love audio. And I like it when people can just plug me, between their ears and then hear, from great people like you. But do you have some ideas about the strategic use of audio to really, trigger those specific emotions and paint those pictures for people?
Yes, I think, what I'd love to start with first is to really encourage people, however you're using audio as a platform, to bring it into the thought of that you're talking to one person at a time. So you may have an audience of 100, 500, 500,000. But to your point, and I love what you pointed out about audio, it's like most people are listening and consuming audio content with earbuds on. And so it's a very intimate experience coming out of the gate. Secondarily to that, they're often commuting, multitasking in their cars, in their homes, in the gym. So it's the one platform that you can carry an essential stranger and invite them into your home, into your house, into your car. So when you are sharing your content and creating your content and building out your content, make sure that you're talking to them in a way that's one-on-one. So if you notice, even with my story about, have you been feeling the slump lately? I know I have. Like, that's me talking to you, one person. And so I think just in general, from a tip tactical scope, just always remember, whenever you're creating your content and having a conversation, have it be a conversation. Even if you can't physically see that person on the other side, picture that you're talking to them and use words like, I want you, or it would be amazing if you, because then they're thinking, oh, she really cares about me, or she's really thinking about me. So that's a more of a generic response. In terms of very specific responses, I think the possibilities are really endless, because it really doesn't matter what your business vertical is, or it doesn't matter what content you're creating, as long as you're personalizing that in a way that creates the opportunity to continue a conversation with you once you've shared that story.
Yeah, and once you get in between their ears and you really use that word, it's the pronoun shift, I like to call it, the you. Instead of talking about we and us and in generalities, you're talking specifically to that listener. But once inside, what do you do with your scripting and maybe even your freelance, recordings, when you're just winging it out there to really try to fire up that theater of the mind?
Right. So I think that, first of all, if you are always focused on what's in it for them versus what's in it for you, you always want to be adding value. And even if it's something so simple as, maybe ultimately the movement you would like to see from the audience would be to sign up for your newsletter or connect with you on LinkedIn. That's a lot of you, that's a lot of me, right? So you have to think about framing out whether it's your story or your content or your call to action. You want to frame that out so that it's encouraging for what is in it for the listener. So when I love what you're saying about the pronoun shift, instead of saying, I want you to sign up for my newsletter,
Yeah.
then you just, it's all about the emphasis, right? So if building your newsletter is your strategy for your call to action, then what you want to say is something to the effect of, if you're looking for a resource that's going to help you grow your business, or if you're looking for a resource that's going to provide you with recipes and the easiest way to complete a meal plan that will take you through a whole busy week, then you are going to love getting my newsletter, because I'm going to do all the heavy lifting for you. All you're going to have to do is just go to the grocery store. So all of a sudden, that's not about my newsletter. That's about what a newsletter for a health and nutrition expert, or, a specific podcaster I'm thinking of is Salad with the Side of Fries, is a client that we work with. She just does an amazing job of having people feel included and providing things like nutrition nuggets. It's like catchy and it's fun and it's content that people want to consume in literal small bites. But if you notice that I was really crafting it to what's the benefit? Like, if someone's going to give you their email, really something needs to be exchange of value for that, but inspire and excite them, right? Because also, if they're multitasking, it needs to be easy for them to do it too. That's another thing.
Yeah. Well, and your stories are always about the outcome for your audience, never really about your offering. Your offering is simply the vehicle. That's just, hers is a newsletter as being the vehicle to the outcome that your audience wants. And so communicate to your audience from their perspective, sharing the outcomes that they can get, the impact that they can have by simply using your particular resource. And that's another shift from the pronoun shift of me and we and us to you. And shifting from your story is not about what you make, but what you make happen in your audience's life.
Yes, absolutely. And I think too that it's just really important to keep that focus on what that value is, but also never underestimate the power of empathy and enthusiasm, because both of those things go a long way in connecting you and keeping and sustaining that relatability. Because if you think about, if you were in a cocktail party situation and you were meeting someone for the first time, you wouldn't just walk up to them and go, sign up for my newsletter. Like that would just, if you did, that would be a little awkward, right? But if you were having a conversation with someone at a cocktail party and they said, I'm so busy, I have 3 kids, I'm trying to eat healthy, who has time for a meal plan? I can barely, go online and order my groceries. Like, then you could go, oh, okay, well, I totally understand that you're struggling with that. That's something I see a lot. Have you, heard about this podcast that I have? And if not, I could send you a link. It's like, those are kind of things that happen naturally, organically in a conversation, or if even more, sharing for a friend. Or I could be like, oh, I have this newsletter I get every day and it helps me with my meal planning. So that's a relatable exchange. Then that person doesn't feel like you're just, throwing a iPad in front of their face and going, sign here,
Well, and a podcast platform is a great place to be sharing testimonials. I've had mine for over 8 years, and literally virtually every guest I have on, including yourself, is a testament to the power of storytelling in many, many, many possible ways in business, leadership, organizational communications, so forth. So really, every show has a bit of an agenda to not only sell the listener on the power of storytelling, but to show it in action and give them tips on how to do it for their own life so that they can, like I like to say, excel through the stories they tell. You are in the podcast platform producing world. Let's talk a little bit about the power of a podcast. And does really everybody need one, or are they really best served for a specific kind of professional coach, entrepreneur, or teacher?
Another great question. I really think that how to explore podcasting can be in a very innovative way. So the answer is not everybody necessarily needs a podcast, but if a podcast is a fit for you, you have to take it to that next level of conversation and be what kind of podcast is the best fit. So, if you're a solo entrepreneur and you want to grow your consulting practice, that's a perfect platform for two reasons because you have the opportunity to showcase your expertise in terms of the area that you consult on and how you can help and develop and grow. So, potential clients, they may read a blog or they may read an article about you or something along those lines, but they can't really get that true idea of what it would be like to actually connect with you like they could if they can hear you or watch you on a video or listen to you on a podcast. And then secondarily, you don't always have to necessarily go with the what has become a traditional format in terms of host interviewing expert guests like we're doing right now, which works really, really well for visibility, leads, and sales from a podcast. But actually, one of the new trends that's coming out in podcasting is to have just a co-hosted podcast with you and another person where you're not relying upon guests as the expert. You become the expert and you're the one that's generating the information and the expertise for people to up level. And that way it up levels your brand. And then you could bring on a guest that may have been a potential client or has been a client that can connect well with potential clients. So there's so many different ways to leverage a podcast. The most important thing is to decide if it is for you. And then if it is for you, what is the type of podcast that you can continue to put out consistently? Because as you know, building a podcast can be an uphill climb, and it's so incredibly important to remain consistent and have your audience being built but relying upon you for that content. And so I think it's very important to discover your why and then what format works best for you.
Do you have a favorite format to produce and or listen to?
Oh, wow. Oh, that's like asking me to pick a favorite child. We're
I
supposed
know
to
it.
love them all the same. Here's how I'll answer that. I love producing shows that are innovative and that zero infomercials, like no information infomercials in our portfolio. So I'm going to share a story about a podcast that we created that I just think is fantastic, if I do say so myself. So we
Sure.
had an author that came to us. She's a journalist. She's written several books. She's had some books adapted to screenplays, and she really, really wanted a podcast. And she just wasn't sure exactly how a podcast would fit in for her to use it as a growth tool for her business. So I came up with a concept called True Fiction Project. And speaking of storytelling, this is one of my favorite formats because we created it together, which is the first half of the podcast is her interviewing someone like we're talking right now, and they're sharing their expertise, they're sharing insightful stories, mostly life transitional stories, transformation stories. So the first half of the podcast is her interviewing someone with a really amazing transformational story. The second half of the podcast is a fiction narrative that's based on that interview. So she records the interview and then she also employs other writers, which is so cool. And so she'll send them the transcript and the recording of the interview, and they will write a short narrative fiction story that is the second part of the podcast. So when you're listening, you get to hear the interview and then you get to hear the true fiction narrative story. And that is the True Fiction podcast. So I love that. And it's so different. But at the end of the day, she has been able to utilize that podcast to get publishing deals. Like I said, adapting to screenplay. Like she's really been able to be recognized in the industry for her show. So it did achieve all the business objectives, but it did so in a very edutainment way.
But that's quite an involved production process, what you're talking about there. A lot of people, most people wouldn't take that on, I would assume, because of the expense of the other writers, the time it takes to get that all pulled together and record it, produce it. So to me, that sounds more, and it sounds fantastic. It's just a much more of a high-level production project than what a lot of podcasters, including myself, do. I do a little storytelling up front with a tip involved so that people can have an immediate takeaway. And then I do the interview and then the wrap to the show, which is considerably easier than a major production like that. So what do you say to people that like, gee, Traci, I would like to get into podcasting, but I'm not sure I want to get into it at that level?
Well, that's where so if you're working with a partner to produce your show, that's where it's so critical to align with someone who can do what we call discovery sessions, which are pre-launch strategy sessions, because the way that we work with someone and how we were working with Renita Hora, who's the host of that show, I was really listening for what it was that she wanted to achieve from the podcast. And some of her milestones and her goals were, I don't want just the normal regular podcast, because she's a creative, she's a writer. She wanted something that was a little bit more of an accelerated show. True fiction was a term that was used in the conversation. So you always want to create a show that's going to be an extension of your brand, like even small nuances, like you and I having a conversation about the power of storytelling in terms of testimonials, like that still is an extension of who you are in the business of story and your brand. So the podcast needs to be an extension of something that you want to show up for every week or every day because you want to be having fun. And then, yes, it has to be sustainable from a production perspective. And we actually designed the narrative storytelling part of that to be a fairly simple production. We just used a music bed for the transition. There's a couple of sprinkles of some sound effects, but the majority of it was really produced just like a typical guest host interview. And then in terms of the writers, she really wanted to give back and help boost other writers' visibility. So a lot of the times, the writers are contributing the stories in exchange for the visibility. I mean, she's certainly not being opportunistic about it because she has writers that she pays as well. But she also has an opportunity for people who are just starting out and want to get, some visibility there. So for her, all of those goals aligned. But the majority of the podcasts that are out there, especially for business focused podcasts, are either host, co-host with a guest, or a combination. I really like the hybrid combination right now in terms of what we're producing that's really being effective and efficient. What I'm liking is two things. One is combining a long form strategy with a short form strategy. So alternate weeks, you may have a full-on guest interview podcast like what we're doing right now, where you can integrate stories and you can interview clients or bring in testimonials and things like that. But it's a more intense conversation, longer form. And then I love the alternate weeks of having a solo episode, which is really cost effective. You can record those on your own and you can just really make it like a tool, tactical or inspirational content piece. So people can experience you on your own and experience you with a guest, and they just get a better sampling of a more well-rounded you.
I've tried a little evolve that. So I started off purely with the guest interview like we're doing here, and the vast majority of mine are. But on my anniversary shows, I will typically take over the show myself and focus on one particular aspect of storytelling. And I even took my book, Brand Bewitchery, and instead of releasing it as an audiobook, I released it as a 12-segment series on my show and just simply read it to my listeners, and they can go to a single landing page and listen to that entire book without having to buy it. I mean, I guess I'm out a little bit of money there, but it really gave me great content that people have responded to. And then I would sprinkle in throughout those some interviews too.
Yeah, and you probably had fun doing it, which is also just really important too.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's a pain in the ass to read your book. God dang, some of those sentences you got to read 9 times before you get them right.
In all my years of broadcast quality production, executive producer, being in broadcast radio, all of the things, I have never read an audiobook. I've done voiceover animation, which I love, but I have not ever actually voiced an audiobook because I don't sit down long enough to write the book in the first place, which is why I started my first podcast, and that book is still yet to be released.
I gotcha. When you have a new client on board who is launching a podcast, how do you get them, or how do you coach them into the storytelling piece to show them the importance of storytelling in all of your work, and then actually how to tell a quick, compelling, concise story?
Okay, well, first of all, I have a very difficult time telling a quick, compelling, succinct story. So it's very hard for me to coach on that. I'm just going to give that disclaimer up front if you haven't
Fair
figured
enough.
that out already. But a lot of what I do is some of the points that we've already covered today is just like really reinforcing to them about using the language of being inclusive. I have actually never had another conversation as succinctly and as mirrored as we had today with you talking about the pull medium versus the push medium. That's something that I really help people understand, is that your content is pulling people in. It is the one area where people they're choosing to spend the time with you. It's an on-demand platform for the most part. So when they make a conscious decision to invest their time with you, you need to really show up and provide them an entertaining, educating, informative, inspirational conversation. Try to hit all of those points wherever possible, but really focusing on that edutainment piece so that people are seeing it as a value return on exchange for their time. And also really getting people to understand that in most cases, we will overestimate the number of people that know what we do, and we will underestimate the number of people that we know. So, a real time example of this is we're working with a podcaster called Seven Figure Consultant. Well, clearly, the name of her show says what she does. She consults seven figure business owners. But her entire podcast, she was never really showcasing what it was that she did. So when we made this small tweak and coached her through actually talking more about storytelling and testimonials, and actually even having a client come on and share their experience of working with her, she literally closed like a high ticket coaching offer. And the person said to her when she closed them, I've been listening to your podcast for years. Okay, years. And I really never understood what it is that you did. That like
Wow.
that is mind blowing, because just that simple shift in doing all the things that we've talked about today led her to close a 5-figure coaching program, because she simply started educating her audience as to what it is that she actually did for them, and instantaneously had that shift in her bottom line, literally, but also in being able to continue the conversation with her potential clients afterwards. And all of that lead up to that is just, you feel like, so I would imagine she felt very frustrated but then very
Mm-hmm.
relieved at the same time. So
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just getting clear on her own story and how to share it on her platform or podcast to get people to truly understand that. So I suppose that's got to be a big part of your work up top as well, is what is the brand, what is the focal point, the focus of this show, to differentiate you in the market, to be out there for that one thing. What is that one thing you solve for?
yes, and it's interesting because we don't necessarily have specific verticals that we focus on businesses that are using their podcast to grow their businesses, but we have interestingly had some different verticals, like with financial advisors, for example. And we are so conscientious to make sure that each of the financial advisor podcasts have their own differentiator coming through their own story. So one of my favorites is a financial advisor that their podcast is Living a Richer Life by Design, and they use stories about what is a richer life, like how do you define a richer life, what does a richer life mean to you. And so the entire context of the podcast is all these amazing great stories, humanitarian stories, and all of these things about what people are able to do once they've accumulated wealth. Like, how do they give back, how do they live their life a richer life by design. Then there's a financial advisor podcast, Don't Retire, Graduate. It's a lot more tongue in cheek. I mean, they use like the graduation music, and he has a caricature of himself in a cap and gown. And it's all about like, when you retire, you don't just like end things, you graduate on, you go to a next chapter. And so it's just, there's all of these different possibilities for you to share your story in a way that works for you. But at the end of the day, you're ultimately trying to bring people back into your network, bring people into your infrastructure, into your business model, all of those things, but you can do it in a way that's authentic to you. And I think that's the important piece.
That's the tricky part. It is about you. You've got to be authentic and vulnerable and all that, all those buzzwords as being a host, but it's really about your listener and or your viewer. What's in it for them? Otherwise, because like you said earlier, they are investing their time and resources in listening to you. So you better show up, and you really better make it about them. And that's why I'm always looking for great guests like you that can help illuminate storytelling in a number of different ways. And a lot of people will say, Park, you've been doing this for 8 years. You've got almost 470 episodes. What more can you say about storytelling? And yet I find all of these fascinating people out there that are using storytelling in different ways to be successful in their business, organizational communications. And it just feels incumbent upon me to introduce fine folks like you to my listeners, just to have another little twist on how to use story in your world.
Well, you know, one quick thing is that never underestimate the power of storytelling to be able to sell, like in a, like people go, oh, I'm not a salesperson. But for business development outside of just how it can be in the context of a podcast or content creation, it's like, I've always been self-proclaimed storyteller seller, because I don't really want that what people say is the ick factor or the yuck factor when it comes to what's perceived as sales. But if you own your own business, or if you're living your life, you're selling something. And if you can do that through ways that are telling stories and help people feel connected to you, and then the price and the product and the service aspect of it, like, you have to deliver on that. There's no doubt about it. But the power of storytelling and being able to sell your own services, whether you're in person, virtual, online, at a conference, anything, you've got to be able to pull people in with a good story to even be able to have a good conversation these days.
Isn't that the truth? Well, Traci, thank you so much for being here. Do you have a special gift for our listeners?
Well, my gift to the listeners is we have the most amazing, robust website, produceyourpodcast.com. And if you go to Produce Your Podcast, you can hear real live examples of some of these short stories that I shared today. There's a lot of tools and resources to help you up your storytelling game. And I would love it if you would connect with me through the contact form or by booking a call. It would be amazing to continue this conversation with you as the listener and see if we can make some magic happen.
Well, Traci, I appreciate it. Coming all the way from San Carlos, Mexico to be on the business of story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, before we end our show, I've got a little Easter egg for you. And, you know, being a theater of the mind radio audio guy, I just wanted to play you one more Robinette radio commercial that is one of my all-time favorites, and see if you can't picture the whole story unfolding before you as you listen to this.
So Ma says, Michael, paint the nice father's ceiling. I figure Navajo white. The man wants a fresco. So here I am, flat on my back, 5 stories up in the Sistine Chapel, and the roof leaks.
Hey, Michael, what's the matter you?
Father, ever hear of Robinette Roofing?
A Robinette who?
Robinette Roofing. They got a foam and coating roof system that's guaranteed to fix this old leaky church.
I don't know. I get a lot of roofers in my confessional.
But Padre, Robinette's roof will insulate and protect you for at least 15 years.
15 years?
Guaranteed. A trusted name since '74. Give them a call for free inspection and estimate.
Got that number, Mr. Wise Guy?
443-1666. That's 443-1666.
I got it.
Peace of mind, Father. That's what Robinette Roofing offers.
All right, Eddie. You don't have to preach.
Look who's talking.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that little story and today's episode. If you did, please share it with anyone you know who would benefit by becoming a more confident, compelling, and influential communicator using the power of story. And of course, I can help you and your peeps do exactly that. I've got online trainings. I can come out to you and do in-person mastery courses. We can even do virtual workshops that are proven effective, so we make it as convenient as possible for all of you to grow as storytellers. Just give me a call or shoot me a note to park@businessofstory.com. Or if you want to test drive my training, visit businessofstory.com/ABT. That's ABT for the and, but, therefore story structure that will blow your mind with how effective it is to make your messages land right the first time, every time. businessofstory.com/ABT. I want to give a big shout out to Marissa Hill for her ongoing marketing and community development around the business of story, for Caden Howell for his expert editing and producing of the show, and of course Darius Holbert for our custom music. Please join me next Monday when I'm going to have an amazing, extraordinary, experienced designer for the hospitality industry. Barely can say that. Samantha Hardcastle. She's going to be here to show you how to design incredible experiences that your customers will not soon forget and be happy to share with their world. And that's what this is really all about, is sharing your story with their world, right? So check it out next week, Samantha Hardcastle, right here for you. And until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make that one sensational. Thanks so much for listening.